Plenum chamber. An enclosed chamber in which air can be held at a pressure slightly higher than that of the surrounding air. Plenum chambers are used to stabilize the pressure of the air before it enters a double-entry centrifugal compressor. PO. Pilot's Operating Handbook. A document published by the airframe manufacturer and approved by the FAA that lists the operating conditions for a particular model of aircraft. Engine operating parameters are included in the PO. Pole shoe. Inward extensions from the field frame of a generator around which the field coils are wound. Pipette valve. A T-shaped valve with a circular head. Pipette valves are used to cover the intake and exhaust openings in the cylinder head of the reciprocating engine. The valves are held closed by one or more coil springs and are opened by a cam lobe or a rocker arm pushing on the end of the valve stem. Porcelain. A hard, white, translucent ceramic material that was used as the insulator in some of the early aircraft spark plugs. Positive displacement pump. A fluid pump that moves a specific volume of fluid each time it rotates. Spur gear pumps, gerotor pumps, and vane pumps are all positive A displacement pumps. Power. The time rate of doing work. Power is found by dividing the amount of work done, measured in floor pounds, by the time in seconds or minutes used to do the work. Power may be expressed in foot-pounds of work per minute or in horsepower. 1 horsepower is 33,000 foot-pounds of work done in 1 minute, or 550 foot-pounds of work done in 1 second. Power assurance check. A test run made of a gas turbine engine to determine how its performance compares with its precious performance as new or freshly overhauled. Powerplant. The complete installation of an aircraft engine, propeller, and all accessories needed for its proper function. Pre-ignition. Ignition of the fuel-air mixture inside the cylinder of an engine before the time for normal ignition. Pre-ignition is often caused by incandescent objects inside the cylinder. Pre-preg. Pre-impregnated fabric. A type of composite material in which the reinforcing fibers are encapsulated in an uncured resin. Pre-preg materials are cut to size and shape, and laid up with the correct ply orientation, and the entire component is cured with heat and pressure. Pressure. A measure of force applied uniformly over a given unit of surface area. Pressure altitude. The altitude in standard atmosphere at which the pressure is the same as the existing pressure. Pressure carburetor. A carburetor installed on some aircraft reciprocating engines that uses the pressure difference between air inside the venture and ram air entering the carburetor to produce a fuel metering force. Pressure carburetors have generally been replaced with continuous flow fuel injection systems. Pressure cooling. A method of air cooling a reciprocating engine in which the cylinders are enclosed in tight-fitting shrouds. The cowling is divided into 2 compartments by baffles and seals, with half of each cylinder in each compartment. Ram air is directed into one compartment, and the pressure in the other is decreased by air flowing over a flared exit or adjustable cowl flaps. The pressure difference across the cylinders causes cooling air to be drawn through the fins to remove the unwanted heat. Pressure injection carburetor. A multi-barrel pressure carburetor used on large radial and V engines. Fuel is metered on the basis of air mass flowing into the engine, and is sprayed under pressure into the eye, or center, of the internal supercharger impeller. Procaling torque. The torque required to turn a threaded fastener before it contacts the surface it is intended to hold. Primary winding. The winding in a magneto or ignition coil that is between the source of voltage and the breaker points. The primary winding is normally made of comparatively large diameter wire, and has a small number of turns, typically about 200. Profile tip. Compressor blade tip. The tip of an axial flow compressor blade whose thickness is reduced to give it a higher resonant frequency so it will not be subject to the vibrations that would affect the blade with a squared tip. The profile tip also provides a more aerodynamically efficient shape for the high-velocity air that is moved by the blade. Profile tips often touch the housing, and make a squealing noise as the engine is shut down. For this reason profile tips are often called squealer tips. Profilometer. A precision measuring instrument used to measure the depth of the hone marks in the surface of a cylinder wall. G21. Prony brake. An instrument used to measure the amount of horsepower an engine is delivering to its output shaft. The engine is operated at a specific RPM, and a brake is applied to its output shaft. The amount of torque applied to the brake is measured. And this, with the RPM, is converted into brake horsepower. Propeller end. The end of the reciprocating engine to which the propeller is attached. Prop fan engine. The registered trade name by Hamilton standard of an ultra-high bypass turbine engine. CU engine. Propulsive efficiency. A measure of the effectiveness with which an aircraft engine converts the fuel it burns into useful thrust. It is the ratio of the thrust horsepower produced by a propeller to the torque horsepower of the shaft turning the propeller. The nearer the speed of the aircraft is to the speed of the exhaust jet or propeller wake, the less kinetic energy is lost in the jet or wake, and the higher the propulsive efficiency. Port. Power recovery turbine. A turbine driven by exhaust gases from several cylinders of a reciprocating engine. Energy extracted from exhaust gases by the turbine is coupled, through a fluid clutch, to the engine crankshaft. Pulsating DC. Direct current whose voltage periodically changes, but whose electrons flow in the same direction all of the time. Pulse jet engine. A type of air-breathing reaction engine used during World War II to power jet-propelled missiles. Fuel is sprayed into the combustion chamber and ignited. As the heated air expands, it closes the one-way shutter valve in the front of the engine, and exits the engine through the nozzle at the rear. As soon as the pressure inside the combustion chamber decreases, air enters through the shutter valve. and more fuel is ignited. The thrust is produced in a series of pulses. Push fit. A fit between pieces in a mechanical assembly that is close enough to require the parts to be pushed together. A push fit is looser than a press fit, but closer than a free fit. Pusher engine. An engine installed with the propeller facing the rear of the aircraft. Thrust produced by the propeller mounted on a pusher engine pushes rather than pulls the aircraft. Pusher propeller. A propeller installed on an aircraft engine, so that it faces the rear of the aircraft. Thrust from the propeller pushes rather than pulls the aircraft. PV diagram. A diagram showing the relationship between the volume of a cylinder and the pressure during the cycle of engine operation. Coil shaft. A type of shaft used to couple parts of an engine that are subject to torsional loads. A coil shaft is a long, hardened steel shaft with splins on each end. One end splins into the drive shaft, and the other end splins into the device being driven. Torsional vibrations are absorbed by the coil shaft twisting. Radial bearing load. The load on a bearing perpendicular to the shaft on which the bearing is mounted. Centrifugal loads are radial loads. Radial engine, static radial. A form of reciprocating engine in which the cylinders radiate out from a small central crankcase. The pistons in the cylinders drive a central crankshaft which in turn drives the propeller. Radial inflow turbine. A turbine. Similar in appearance to a centrifugal compressor rotor. Radial inflow turbines are used to drive the compressor in reciprocating engine turbochargers, and some of the smaller APU turbine engines. Hot gases flow into the turbine from its outside rim, then radially inward through the vanes, and out of the turbine at its center. Radiation. See electromagnetic radiation. Ram air. Air whose pressure has been increased by the forward motion of the aircraft. Ram air pressure is the same as pitot pressure. Ram drag. The loss of thrust produced by a turbojet or turbofan engine caused by the increase of velocity of air entering the engine. Ram drag is the difference between gross thrust and net thrust. Ram pressure. Pressure produced when a moving fluid is stopped. Ram recovery speed. The speed of an aircraft at which the ram effect caused by the forward movement increases the air pressure at the compressor inlet, so that it is the same as that of the ambient air. Ramjet engine. The simplest type of air-breathing reaction engine. Air entering the front of the engine at a high velocity has fuel sprayed into it and ignited. A barrier formed by the incoming air forces the expanding gases to leave through the nozzle at the rear. The energy added by the burning fuel accelerates the air and produces a forward thrust. Ramjet engines are used in some military unmanned aircraft that G-22 are initially boosted to a speed high enough for the engine to function. Ratiometer indicator. An analog temperature measuring instrument in which the pointer deflection is proportional to the ratio between the current flowing in an internal reference circuit and that flowing through the temperature sensing probe. Reach. Spark plug specification. The length of the threads on the shell of a spark plug. Reaction engine. A form of heat engine that produces thrust by heating a mass of air inside the engine and discharging it at a high velocity through a specially shaped nozzle. The amount of thrust is determined by the mass of the air and the amount it is accelerated. Reactive power. Wattless power in an AC circuit. It is the power consumed in the inductive and capacitive reactances. Reactive power is expressed in volt-amps reactive VAR, or in kilovolt-amps reactive kVAR. Ream fur. The fit of a shaft in a hole in which the hole is drilled under size and cut with a reamer to the correct diameter. Reamed holes have smooth walls and a consistent diameter. Rebuilt engine. A used engine that has been completely disassembled, inspected, repaired as necessary, and reassembled, tested, and approved in the same manner, and to the same tolerances and limits as a new engine, using either new or used parts. However, all parts used must conform to all production drawings, tolerances, and limits for new parts, or be of approved oversize or undersize dimensions for a new engine. According to 14 CFR Part 91, Section 91.421, a rebuilt engine is considered to have no precious operating history, and may be issued a zero-time logbook. Only the engine manufacturer can rebuild an engine, and issue a zero-time record. Reciprocating engine. A type of heat engine that changes the reciprocating, back and forth, motion of pistons inside the cylinders into rotary motion of a crankshaft. Rectifier. A device that allows electrons to flow in one direction, while preventing their flow in the opposite direction. Rectifiers are used to change AC into DC. Reheat system. The British name for an afterburner. See afterburner. Read vapor pressure. The amount of pressure that must be exerted on a liquid to keep it from vaporizing. Read vapor pressure is measured at 100 superscript OF. Reliability. The ability of an aircraft engine to perform its design functions under widely varying operating conditions. Residual magnetic particle inspection. A form of magnetic particle inspection for small steel parts that have a high degree of retentivity. The part is magnetized, removed, and inspected away from the magnetizing machine. Residual magnetism. The magnetism that remains in the field frame of a generator, when no current is flowing in the field coils. Residual voltage. The voltage produced in a generator armature, when the armature is rotated in the residual magnetism. Resistor spark plug. A shielded spark plug with a resistor between the ignition lead terminal and the center electrode. The resistor stops the flow of secondary current when its voltage drops to a specified value. The resistor prevents capacitive afterfiring. Retarded sparks. The timing of the firing of the spark plugs used to start a reciprocating engine. The sparks for starting occur later in terms of crankshaft rotation than those used for normal operation. Retarding the sparks prevent the engine from kicking back when it is being started. Retentivity. The ability of a magnetizable material to retain the alignment of the magnetic domains after the magnetizing force has been removed. Hard steel normally has a high retentivity, while soft iron and electrical steel both have very low retentivity. Reverse flow combustor. A type of combustor in which the air from the compressor enters the combustor outer case and reverses its direction as it flows into the inner liner. It again reverses its direction as it flows into the inner liner. It again reverses its direction before it flows through the turbine. Reverse flow combustors are used where engine length is critical. RF energy. Electromagnetic energy with a frequency high enough to radiate from any conductor through which it is flowing. Rich blowout. A condition in which the fire in a gas turbine engine goes out because the fuel-air mixture ratio is too rich to sustain combustion. G23. Rich mixture. A fuel-air mixture that contains less than 15 parts of air to 1 part of fuel, by weight. Riffle file. A hand file with its teeth formed on a curved surface that resembles a spoon. RMS. Root means square. A dimension that is the square root of the average of an infinite number of varying values. An RMS dimension is used to indicate the allowable surface roughness of a reciprocating engine cylinder wall. Rocker arm. A pivoted arm on the cylinder head of the reciprocating engine. The push rod forces one end of the rocker arm up, and as the other end moves down, it forces the pivot valve off of its seat. Rocker box. The enclosed part of the reciprocating engine cylinder that houses the rocker arm and valve mechanism. Rocket engine. A form of reaction engine, whose fuel and oxidizer contain all of the oxygen needed for the release of heat energy. The released heat expands the gases which are ejected at a high velocity from a nozzle at the rear of the rocket. Because rocket engines carry their own oxygen, they can operate in outer space where there is no atmosphere. Rotary radial engine. A form of reciprocating engine used in some early aircraft. The crankshaft is rigidly attached to the airframe, and the propeller, crankcase, and cylinders all revolve as a unit. Rotating combustion, RC, engine. A form of internal combustion engine in which a rounded, triangular-shaped rotor with sliding seals at the apexes forms the combustion space inside an hourglass-shaped chamber. Expanding gases from the burning fuel-air mixture push the rotor around and turn a geared drive shaft in its center. The RC engine was conceived in Germany by Felix Wankel in 1955. RPM. Revolutions per minute. A measure of rotational speed. 1 RPM is 1 revolution made in 1 minute. Run-in. A time of controlled operation of a new, or freshly overhauled engine that allows the moving parts to wear together. Run-up. A procedure in which an aircraft engine is operated on the ground to determine its condition and performance. Run-out. A measure of the amount a shaft, flange, or disc is bent or fails to run true. Run-out is normally measured with a dial indicator. C. Society of Automotive Engineers. A professional organization that has formulated standards for the automotive and aviation industries. Safety gap. A location in a magneto that allows a spark to jump to ground from the secondary circuit before the voltage rises high enough to damage the secondary insulation. Sand casting. A method of molding metal parts in a mold made of sand. A pattern that duplicates the part to be molded is made of wood, and is covered with a special casting sand that contains a resin to bind it. The mold is separated along a special parting line, and the pattern is removed. The mold is put back together, and molten metal is poured into the cavity. When the metal cools, the sand is broken away from the molded part. Sand casting is less expensive than permanent mold casting. Sabot seconds universal, SHU, viscosity. A measurement of viscosity, resistance to flow, of a lubricating oil. The number of seconds needed for 60 milliliters of oil at a specified temperature to flow through a calibrated orifice. The viscosity number used for commercial aviation engine lubricating oil relates closely to the SHU viscosity of the oil at 210 superscript OF. Scavenge subsystem. The subsystem in the lubrication system of a gas turbine engine that collects oil after it has lubricated the bearings and gears and returns it to the oil tank. Scimitar shape. The shape of the blades of the propellers mounted on tube engines. The name is derived from the shape of a curved Asian sword that has its edge on the convex side. Tube engine. Scramjet. Supersonic combustion ramjet. A special type of ramjet engine, whose fuel can be ignited while the vehicle is mobbing at a supersonic speed. Scuffing. Severe damage to moving parts caused when one metal part moves across another without sufficient lubricant between them. Enough heat is generated by friction to cause the high points of the surfaces to weld together. Continued movement tears, or scuffs. The metal. Sea-level boosted engine. A reciprocating engine that has had its sea-level rated horsepower increased by supercharging. This is the same as a ground-boosted engine. Secondary winding. The winding in a magneto or ignition coil that connects to the distributor rotor. The secondary winding is normally made of very small diameter wire, and has a large number of turns, typically about 20,000. G24. Self-accelerating speed. The speed attained by a gas turbine engine during startup that allows it to accelerate to its normal idling speed without assistance from the starter. Semiconductor transducer. A piezoelectric crystal that converts input energy of one form, such as pressure, into output energy of another, such as an electrical signal. Series wound motor. An electric motor with field coils connected in series with the armature. Serviceable limits. Limits included in the reciprocating engine overhaul manual. If a part measures outside of the new part's limits, but within the serviceable limits, it will not likely wear to the point of causing engine failure within a next bow interval. Servo system. A type of automatic control system in which part of the output is fed back into the input. Shaft horsepower. The horsepower actually available at a rotating shaft. Shielding. The electrically conductive covering placed around an electrical component to intercept and conduct to ground any electromagnetic energy radiated from the device. Short circuit. A low resistance connection between 2 points in an electric circuit. Shower of sparks ignition system. A patented ignition system for reciprocating engines. An induction sieve rater sends pulsating DC into a set of retard breaker points on one of the magnetos. This provides a hot and retarded spark for starting the engine. Single shaft turbine engine. A turboprop engine in which the propeller reduction gears are driven by the same shaft that drives the compressor for the gas generator. Single spool gas turbine engine. A type of axial flow compressor gas turbine engine that has only one rotating element. Skin radiator. A type of radiator used on some early liquid-cooled racing airplanes. The radiator was made of 2 thin sheets of brass, slightly separated so the heated coolant could flow between them. Skin radiators were mounted on the surface of the wing, on the sides of the fuselage, or on the floats of seaplanes. Air flowing over the smooth surface of the radiator removed heat from the coolant. Slip. Propeller specification. The difference between the geometric and effective pitch of a propeller. Slip ring. A smooth, continuous ring of brass or copper mounted on the rotor shaft of an electrical generator or alternator. Brushes riding on the smooth surface of the slip ring carry current into and out of the rotor coil. Slow blow ruse. A special type of electrical circuit protection device that allows a momentary flow of excess current, but opens the circuit if the excessive flow is sustained. Sludge. A heavy contaminant that forms in an aircraft engine lubricating oil because of oxidation and chemical decomposition of the oil. Sludge plugs. Spool-shaped sheet metal plugs installed in the hollow throws of some engine crankshafts. Slug. The unit of mass equal to that which experiences an acceleration of 1 foot per second. Per second when a force of 1 pound acts on it. It is equal to 32.174 pounds, or 14.5939 kilograms, of mass. Also called a G-pound. SOAP. Spectrometric Oil Analysis Program. An oil analysis program in which a sample of oil is burned in an electric arc and an analysis is made of the wavelength composition of the resulting light. Each chemical element in the oil, when burned, produces light containing a unique band of frequencies. A computer analyzes the amount of each band of frequencies and prints out the number of parts of the element per million parts of the entire sample. SOAP can predict engine problems by warning the engine operator of an uncharacteristic increase of any elements in the oil. Sound suppressor. The airframe component that replaces the turbine engine tailpipe. It reduces the distance the sounds made by the exhaust gases propagate by converting low-frequency vibrations. Specific gravity. The ratio of the density of a material to the density of pure water. Specific weight. The ratio of the weight of an aircraft engine to the brake horsepower it develops. Splin. Parallel slots cut in the periphery of a shaft, parallel to its length. Matching slots. Cut into the hub or wheel that fits on the shaft. Lock the shaft into the device to transmit torque. Sprag clutch. A freewheeling, non-reversible clutch that allows torque to be applied to a driven unit in one direction only. G25. Springback. A condition in the rigging of an aircraft engine control in which the stop at the engine is reached before the stop in the flight deck. The flight deck control moves slightly after the stop in the engine is reached, and when it is released, it springs back slightly. Spur gear pump. A form of constant displacement fluid pump that uses 2 meshing spur gears mounted in a close-fitting housing. Fluid is taken into the housing where it fills the space between the teeth of the gears, and is carried around the housing as the gears rotate. On the discharge side of the pump, the teeth of the 2 gears mesh, and the fluid is forced out of the pump. Squat switch. An electrical switch actuated by the landing gear scissors on the oleo strut. When no weight is on the landing gear, the oleo piston is extended and the switch is in one position. But when weight is on the gear, the oleo strut compresses and the switch changes its position. Squealer tip. Compressor blade tip. C-profile tip. Squeeze film bearings. Another name for oil-damped bearings. See oil-damped bearings. Stage length. The distance between landing points in airline operation. Stage of a compressor. 1 disc of rotor blades, and the following set of stator vanes in an axial flow compressor. Staggered timing. Ignition timing that causes the spark plug nearest the exhaust valve to fire a few degrees of crankshaft rotation before the spark plug nearest the intake valve. Standard day conditions. Conditions that have been decided upon by the ICAO for comparing all aircraft and engine performance. The most basic standard day conditions are temperature, 15 superscript OC or 52 superscript OF, altitude, mean sea level, pressure, 29.92 inches of mercury. Standard J1. A World War I training airplane powered by a Curtiss OX-5 engine. Standpipe. A pipe which protrudes upward from the base of an oil tank and through which oil used for normal engine lubrication is drawn. In the event of a catastrophic leak, when all oil available to the engine-driven pump is lost overboard, enough oil is available from an outlet below the standpipe to feather the propeller. Starter generator. A single component starter and generator used on many smaller gas turbine engines. It is used to start the engine, and when the engine is running, its circuitry is shifted so that it acts as a generator. Static pressure. The pressure of an unmoving fluid. Static RPM. The number of revolutions per minute an aircraft engine can produce when the aircraft is not moving. Steam cooling. A method of liquid cooling in which the coolant, normally water, is allowed to absorb enough heat that it boils. The steam gives up its heat when it condenses back into a liquid. Satellite. A non-ferrous alloy of cobalt, chromium, and tungsten. Slite is hard, water-resistant, and corrosion-resistant, and it does not soften until its temperature is extremely high. Slite is welded to the faces of many reciprocating engine exhaust valves that operate at very high temperatures. Stepping motor. A precision electric motor, whose output shaft position is changed in steps by pulses from the control device. Stepping motors can make high torque changes in small angular increments to their output shaft. Stoichiometric mixture. The fuel-air mixture ratio that, when burned, leaves no uncombined oxygen nor any free carbon. It releases the maximum amount of heat, and therefore produces the highest exhaust gas temperature. A stoichiometric mixture of gasoline and air contains 15 pounds of air for 1 pound of gasoline. Straight-through combustor. A combustor in a gas turbine engine through which the air from the compressor to the turbine flows in an essentially straight line. Stratosphere. The upper part of the Earth's atmosphere. The stratosphere extends upward from the tropopause, which is approximately 36,000 feet above the surface of the Earth, to approximately 85,000 feet. The temperature of the air in the stratosphere remains constant at minus 56.5 superscript OC-69.7 superscript OF. Stress. A force within an object that tries to prevent an outside force from changing its shape. Stroboscopic tachometer. A tachometer used to measure the speed of any rotating device without physical contact. A highly accurate variable frequency oscillator triggers a high-intensity strobe light. When the lamp is flashing at the same frequency the device is rotating, the device appears to stand still. G26. Stroke. The distance the piston moves inside the cylinder. Sump. Aircraft engine component. A low point in an aircraft engine in which lubricating oil collects and is stored or transferred to an external oil tank. A removable sump attached to the bottom of the crankcase of a reciprocating engine is often called an oil pan. Sump. Fuel tank component. A low point in an aircraft fuel tank in which water and other contaminants collect and are held until they can be drained out. Supercharged engine. A reciprocating engine that uses a mechanically driven compressor to increase the air pressure before it enters the engine cylinders. Supercharger. An air compressor used to increase the pressure of the air being taken into the cylinders of a reciprocating engine. Surface roughness. The condition of the surface of a reciprocating engine cylinder wall that has been honed to make it hold lubricating oil. Surface roughness is measured in microinches RMS. Surge. A condition of unstable airflow through the compressor of a gas turbine engine, in which the compressor blades have an excessive angle of attack. Surge usually affects an entire stage of compression. Synthetic oil. Oil made by chemical synthesis of a mineral, animal, or vegetable base. Synthetic oils have appropriate additives that give them such characteristics as low volatility, low pour point, high viscosity index, good lubricating qualities, low coke and lacquer formation, and low foaming. Tachometer. An instrument that measures the rotational speed of an object. Tie. Thermal anti-ice. A system used to prevent the formation of ice on an aircraft by flowing heated air inside the structure. Tailpipe. The portion of the exhaust system of a gas turbine engine through which the gases leave. The tailpipe is often called the exhaust duct, or exhaust pipe. Bow. Time between overhauls. A time period specified by the manufacturer of an aircraft engine as the maximum length of time an engine should be operated between overhauls without normal wear causing parts of the engine to be worn beyond safe limits. Bow depends upon proper operation and maintenance in accordance with the engine manufacturer's recommendations. The overhaul of an engine when it reaches its bow hours is not mandatory, except for certain commercial operators that have the requirement written into their operations manual. TDC. Top dead center. The position of a piston in a reciprocating engine, when the piston is at the top of its stroke and the wrist pin, crank pin, and center of the crankshaft are all in line. TEL. Tetrythyl lead. Test club. A wide blade, short diameter propeller used on a reciprocating engine when it is run in a test cell. A test club applies a specific load to the engine and forces the maximum amount of air through the engine cooling fins. Thermal efficiency. The ratio of the amount of useful work produced by a heat engine to the amount of work that could be done by all of the heat energy available in the fuel burned. Thermal expansion coefficient. A number that relates to the change in the physical dimensions of a material as the temperature of the material changes. The thermal expansion coefficient of aluminum is approximately twice that of steel. Thermal shock. The sudden change in engine operating temperature that occurs when engine power is suddenly reduced at the same time the airspeed, thus the cooling, is increased. Thermal shock occurs when an aircraft is required to rapidly descend to a lower altitude. Thermistor. A semiconductor material, whose electrical resistance varies with its temperature. Thermocouple. A device used to generate an electrical current. A thermocouple is made of two dissimilar metal wires, whose ends are welded together to form a loop. A voltage exists in the loop proportional to the difference in temperature of the junctions at which the wires are joined. The amount of current flowing in the loop is determined by the types of metals used for the wires, the temperature difference between the junctions, and the resistance of the wires. Thermosetting resin. A plastic resin that, once it has been hardened by heat, cannot be softened by heating again. Thermostatic valve. A temperature-sensitive valve that controls the temperature of oil in an aircraft engine. When the oil is cold, the valve shifts and directs the oil through the oil cooler. G27. Thermoswitch. An electrical switch that closes a circuit when it is exposed to a specified high temperature. Three-dimensional cam. A drum-shaped cam in a hydromechanical fuel control, whose outer surface is ground, so that followers riding on the surface, as the cam is moved up and down and rotated, can move mechanical linkages to control the fuel according to a pre-programmed schedule. Throttle. The control in an aircraft that regulates the power, or thrust the pilot wants the engine to produce. Throw, crankshaft design. See offset throw. Thrust horsepower. The horsepower equivalent of the thrust produced by a turbojet engine. Thrust horsepower is found by multiplying the net thrust of the engine, measured in pounds, by the speed of the aircraft, measured in miles per hour, and then dividing this by 375. Thrust. The aerodynamic force produced by a propeller or turbojet engine as it forces a mass of air to the rear, behind the aircraft. A propeller produces its thrust by accelerating a large mass of air by a relatively small amount. A turbojet engine produces its thrust by accelerating a smaller mass of air by a much larger amount. Time right indicator. A patented piston position indicator used to find the position of the piston in the cylinder of a reciprocating engine. The body of the time right indicator screws into a spark plug hole, and as the piston moves outward in the cylinder, it contacts the arm of the indicator. A pointer contacted by the arm moves across a calibrated scale to show the location of the piston in degrees of crankshaft rotation before top center. Timing light. An indicator light used when timing magnetos to an engine to indicate when the breaker point's open. Some timing lights incorporate an oscillator, or buzzer that changes its pitch when the point's open. TIT. Turbine inlet temperature. The temperature of the gases from the combustion section of a gas turbine engine as they enter the turbine inlet guide vanes, or the first stage of the turbine. Toggle. A T-shaped handle fitted onto the end of a cable used to engage a simple starter with an overrunning clutch. Top overhaul. An overhaul of the cylinders of an aircraft engine. The valves, pistons, and cylinders are overhauled, but the crankcase is not opened. Torque. A force that produces or tries to produce rotation. Total pressure. The pressure a column of moving fluid would have if it were stopped from its motion. Total pressure is the sum of dynamic pressure and static pressure. Total temperature. The temperature of moving fluid that has been stopped from its motion. Total temperature is the sum of static temperature and the temperature rise caused by the ram effect as the fluid was stopped. Town end ring. A type of ring cowling used over a single-row radial engine. The cross-section of the ring is in the form of an airfoil that produces enough forward thrust to compensate for the cooling drag of the engine. In the United States, town end rings are often called speed rings. Track. The path followed by a blade segment of a propeller or helicopter rotor in one rotation. Tractor engine. An engine installed with the propeller facing the front of the aircraft. Thrust produced by the propeller mounted on a tractor engine pulls the aircraft through the air. Tractor propeller. A propeller mounted on an airplane in such a way that its thrust pulls the aircraft. Trailing edge. The thin edge of the rear of a propeller blade. Transducer. A device that changes energy from one form to another. Commonly used transducers change mechanical movement or pressures into electrical signals. Transformer. An electrical component used to change the voltage and current in an AC circuit. Transonic range. Flight at Mach numbers between 0.8 and 1.2. In this range, some air passing over the aircraft is subsonic, and some is supersonic. Trend monitoring. A system for comparing engine performance parameters with a baseline of these same parameters established when the engine was new or newly overhauled. Parameters such as ECT, RPM, fuel flow, and oil consumption are monitored on every flight, and the baseline is plotted. Any deviation from a normal increase or decrease warns the technician of an impending problem. Tricretyl phosphate. TCP. A colorless, combustible compound. CH3C6H4O3PO. That is used as a plasticizer in aircraft dope and an additive in gasoline and lubricating oil. TCP aids in scavenging lead deposits left in the cylinders when leaded fuel is burned. G28. TSFC. Thrust-specific fuel consumption. A measure of efficiency of a turbojet or turbofan engine. It is a measure of the number of pounds of fuel burned per hour for each pound of thrust produced. Turbine. A wheel fitted with vanes, or buckets, radiating outward from its circumference. The reactive or aerodynamic force caused by the fluid flowing through the vanes is converted into mechanical power that spins the shaft on which the wheel is mounted. Turbine engine. See gas turbine engine. Turbine inlet guide vanes. A series of stator vanes immediately ahead of the first stage turbine. The function of the inlet guide vanes is to divert the hot gases in the proper direction to enter the turbine, and to provide a series of convergent ducts which increase the velocity of the gases. Turbine nozzle. Another name for turbine inlet guide vanes. Turbocharger. An exhaust-driven air compressor used to increase the power of a reciprocating engine. A turbocharger uses a small radial inflow turbine in the exhaust system to drive a centrifugal-type air compressor on the turbine shaft. The compressed air is directed into the engine cylinders to increase power. Turbo compound engine. A reciprocating engine that has power recovery turbines in its exhaust system. The power extracted from the exhaust by these turbines is directed into the engine crankshaft through a fluid coupling. Turbofan engine. A type of gas turbine engine that has a set of lengthened blades on the low-pressure compressor or low-pressure turbine. Air moved by these special blades bypasses the core engine and produces between 30% and 75% of the total thrust. Turbojet engine. A gas turbine engine that produces thrust by accelerating the air flowing through it. A minimum of energy is extracted by the turbine, with the majority used to produce an exhaust velocity much greater than the inlet velocity. The amount of thrust produced by the engine is determined by the amount the air is accelerated as it flows through the engine. Turboprop engine. A turbine engine in which several stages of turbines are used to extract as much energy as possible. The turbines drive reduction gears which in turn drive a propeller. Turboshaft engine. A turbine engine in which several stages of turbines are used to extract as much energy as possible. The turbines drive shafts which are used to drive helicopter rotors, generators, or pumps. Turbosupercharger. A centrifugal air compressor driven by exhaust gases flowing through a turbine. The compressed air is used to increase the power produced by a reciprocating engine at altitude. Two-spool engine. Dual-spool gas turbine engine. Two-stroke cycle. A constant volume cycle of energy transformation that completes its operating cycle in 2 strikes of the piston, 1 up and 1 down. When the piston moves up, fuel is pulled into the crankcase, and at the same time the fuel-air mixture inside the cylinder is compressed. When the piston is near the top of its stroke, a spark plug ignites the compressed fuel-air mixture, and the burning and expanding gases force the piston down. Near the bottom of the stroke, the piston uncovers an exhaust port, and the burned gases leave the cylinder. When the piston moves further down, it uncovers the intake port, and a fresh charge of fuel and air are forced from the crankcase into the cylinder. UDF engine. Unducted fan trademark. The trade name registered by General Electric for a type of ultra-high bypass turbofan engine that drives 1 or more wide-blade propellers that have between 8 and 12 blades. These blades, which are not enclosed in a duct or shroud, are very thin, have wide chords, and are highly swept back in a scimitar shape that enables them to power airplanes flying in the speed range near Mach 0.8. UB, ultra-high bypass engine. A turbine that drives a pair of ducted or unducted contra-rotating propellers which have 8 to 12 variable pitch blades. These blades are very thin, have wide chords, and are swept back with a scimitar shape that allows them to power airplanes flying in the speed range of Mach 0.8. The blades are made of advanced composites for high strength and light weight. USH engines may be of either the tractor or pusher type, and have a bypass ratio in excess of 30:1. Underspeed condition. A speed condition in which the engine is turning at an RPM lower than that for which the propeller governor is set. Unidirectional fibers. Fibers in a piece of composite material arranged so that they sustain loads in only one direction. Updraft carburetor. A carburetor that mounts on the bottom of a reciprocating engine. Air entering the engine flows upward through the carburetor. G29. Upper deck pressure. The absolute pressure of air at the inlet to the fuel metering system of a turbocharged engine. Upper deck pressure is the same as the turbocharger discharge pressure. V-blocks. A fixture that allows a shaft to be centered and rotated to measure any out-of-round condition. V-engine. A form of reciprocating engine in which the cylinders are arranged in 2 banks. The banks are separated by an angle of between 45 superscript O and 90 superscript O. Pistons in 2 cylinders, 1 in each bank, are connected to each throw of the crankshaft. Valence electrons. Electrons in the outer shell, or ring, around the nucleus of an atom. It is the valence electrons that give an atom its electrical characteristics, and are the electrons that may be pulled loose from an atom to cause electrical current. Valve overlap. The portion of the operating cycle of a 4-stroke cycle reciprocating engine during which both the intake and exhaust valves are off of their seats at the same time. Vapor lock. A condition of fuel starvation that can occur in a reciprocating engine fuel system. If the fuel in the line between the tank and carburetor is heated enough for the fuel to vaporize, a bubble will form in the line. If the vapor pressure of the bubble is high enough, it will block the fuel and keep it from flowing to the engine. Vapor pressure. The amount of pressure needed above a liquid to prevent it from evaporating. Vaporize. The changing of a liquid into a vapor. Vector thrust engine. A turbojet or turbofan engine with the fan and or exhaust nozzles mounted in such a way that they may be rotated in flight to produce forward, vertically upward, or rearward thrust. Velocity. A vector quantity that expresses both the speed an object is moving, and the direction in which it is moving. Velocity turbine. A turbine driven by forces produced by the velocity, rather than the pressure, of gases flowing through the vanes. Venture. A specially shaped restrictor in a tube designed to speed up the flow of fluid passing through it. According to Bernoulli's principle, any time the flow of fluid speeds up without losing or gaining any energy from the outside, the pressure of the fluid decreases. Vernier coupling. A timing coupling used with base-mounted magnetos. The vernier coupling allows the timing to be adjusted in increments of considerably less than 1 degree. Vertical tape instrument. A tall rectangular instrument that displays the quantity of the parameter being measured by a movable strip of colored tape. The presentation resembles a vertical bar graph. Vibration loop. A loop in a rigid fluid line used to prevent vibration from concentrating stresses that could cause the line to break. VIF. Vectoring in forward flight. A method of enhancing the maneuverability of an airplane by vectoring the exhaust gases and/or fan discharge air to produce thrust components not parallel to the longitudinal axis of the aircraft. Viscosimeter. An instrument used to measure the viscosity of a liquid. The time required for a given volume of liquid at a specified temperature to flow through a calibrated orifice is used to indicate the viscosity of the liquid. Viscosity. The resistance of a fluid to flow. Viscosity is the stiffness of the fluid, or its internal friction. Viscosity index, 6. A measure of change in viscosity of an oil as it changes temperature. The higher the viscosity index, the less the viscosity changes. Viscosity index improver. An additive used to produce a multi-viscosity lubricating oil. The polymer additive expands as temperature increases and contracts as temperature decreases. 6 improvers cause viscosity to increase as oil heats and decrease as it cools. Volatile memory. Computer memory that is lost when the power to the computer is turned off. Volatility. The characteristic of a liquid that relates to its ability to vaporize or change into a gas. Volumetric efficiency. The ratio of the volume of the charge of the fuel and air inside the cylinder of a reciprocating engine to the total physical volume of the cylinder. Von Ohain. Drive. Hans Pabst. The designer and developer of the first turbojet engine to power an airplane. His Haas 3B engine was built in Germany by the Heinkel Company, and it flew in a Heinkel He-178 airplane on August 27, 1939. G30. Vortex. A whirling mass of air that sucks everything near it toward its center. Vortex dissipator. A high-velocity stream of compressor bleed air blown from a nozzle into an area where vortices are likely to form. Vortex dissipators destroy the vortices that would otherwise suck debris from the ground into engines mounted in pods that are low to the ground. Wake. The high-velocity stream of turbulent air behind an operating aircraft engine. Wankel engine. See rotating combustion, RC, engine. Wastegate. A controllable butterfly valve in the exhaust pipe of a reciprocating engine equipped with an exhaust-driven turbocharger. When the wastegate is open, exhaust gases leave the engine through the exhaust pipe, and when it is closed, they leave through the turbine. Watt. The basic unit of power in the metric system. 1 watt is the amount of power needed to do 1 joule, 0.7376 foot-pound of work, in 1 second. 1 watt is 1/746th horsepower. Wet sump engine. An engine that carries its lubricating oil supply in a reservoir that is part of the engine itself. Wet sump lubrication system. A lubrication system in which the oil supply is carried within the engine itself. Return oil drains into the oil reservoir by gravity. Whittle, Sir Frank. The British Royal Air Force flying officer who in 1929 filed a patent application for a turbojet engine. Whittle's engine first flew in a Glossary .28 on May 15, 1941. The first jet flight in America was made on October 2, 1942, in a Bell XP-59A that was powered by 2 Whittle-type General Electric IA engines. Windmilling propeller. A propeller that is rotated by air flowing over the blades rather than powered by the engine. Work. The product of a force times the distance the force is moved. Worm gear. A helical gear mounted on a shaft. The worm meshes with a spur gear, whose teeth are cut at an angle to its face. A worm gear is an irreversible mechanism. The rotation of the shaft, on which the worm gear locks the spur gear so its shaft cannot be rotated. Wrist pin. The hardened steel pin that attaches a piston to the small end of a connecting rod. Yaw. Rotation of an aircraft about its vertical axis. Zero-lash valve lifter. A hydraulic valve lifter that maintains zero clearance in the valve actuating mechanism. G31. G32. Index.